We've got an amazing guest tonight for our Q&A, who I'll introduce in just a second. I just want to thank my staff, my TAP staff, which is Harrison Honor, Greg LaRosa, who are both here. Harrison's been doing an incredible job with the social media advertising, and I think that's probably why you guys are all here. If you find any of his humor offensive, some of the stuff that he puts online, some of his jokes that include, characters from Breaking Bad, please let us know, um, because we can't have that. But I happen to think he's pretty funny. And Greg LaRosa, our director of operations, he is the silent man behind the scenes making this happen. Thanks to him. TAPS is a 501c3 organization. We're a nonprofit organization. Last year, we expanded things to include the TAPS LA Music Festival. We've also been doing outreach with the Schweitzer Learning Center, which the nuts and bolts of it are we're teaching them West African drumming. And it's a beautiful thing because it doesn't require any prior musical knowledge, doesn't require you to read music. And so we get these young people playing right away. These are high schoolers, some of whom have autism or are on the spectrum. And we've had a great time doing it. So that's a big part of our mission. Um, we have our festival coming up this June, June 12th through the 26th. And we encourage you to apply now. You can apply without submitting your tape. You can submit your tape. You have up until April 30th to do so. So right now, application fees are discounted. We're looking for 8 fellows. The other thing I announced last week or 2 weeks ago was that we are now tuition free, and we are also free room and board. So if you're interested, please submit an application to the TAPS LA Music Festival 2022. If somebody you think might be interested, let them know about it. Lastly, we really need your help because we're a nonprofit organization and because we don't charge for anything like some other people. We rely solely on donations from individuals, from companies. So we have a donation of product tonight from Freer Percussion, which I think you all know about. But if you're in a position to donate anything large or small, please go to our website, and anything would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. All right. Without further ado, by the way, if you're new to TAPS Q&As, we welcome your questions. We have Instagram questions that have been coming in this week, but if you have questions that come up during this class, I'm looking at you, Dingus, Jacob Schoenfeld, Adam Vera, but particularly Dingus. If you have questions for us, put them in the chat thread, and we will definitely ask them to our guest. As in, I will ask them to the guest. If you want to speak to our guest, that's fine too. Just hit me up on the chat and say, "Hey, I want to speak to Parker." All right, so let's introduce him. There's Dingus chiming in. Thank you,
Who is
Dingus.
Dingus?
Yeah, I've got some ideas. We
Oh,
have trolls. We're only in
you know
the
what?
ninth minute and we have trolls.
I have an idea. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you've got an idea. Well,
Yeah.
we'll get to him or her in just a moment. Our guest today is Mr. Parker Lee. Parker's a good friend of mine. Parker is also my colleague, believe it or not. Where do you teach, Parker?
I teach at Lynn Conservatory in
Lynn
Florida.
Conservatory. I've heard of
You heard of
that.
that?
Where is that?
I think it's in Florida, in Boca Raton.
Okay, you think it's in Florida. Okay, so it's a conservatory of music, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you teach percussion and mainly timpani, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yep.
fascinating. You know what? I do too. And that's where Parker and I saw each other last. We got to hang out together in Boca. We had a really nice sushi meal and got to catch up. So, Parker Lee, principal timpanist of the Metropolitan Opera, welcome. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Ted. Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm good. I can't complain. How are
Good.
you?
I'm doing okay. I first need to ask you what's going on in New York City. What's your weather situation like? How are you doing with the whole COVID thing out in New York? Catch me up.
Um, it's a whole lot better than it was a year ago. That's for
Uh-huh.
sure. Things are at a solid 70% normal, I'd say. There's still some precautions, but I think in general we're doing pretty well handling the current situation. The weather's winter. It's cold, but it's I grew up in the Northeast, so it's
Yeah.
fine.
What do you have for temperature right now?
I think it's like 33 or so
Ah,
ish.
unbearable. Couldn't do it. Couldn't possibly do it.
Anything above zero is fine, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Your blood thickens up, I think.
right.
Most
You
of
know,
yeah,
we've come a long way in a year. A year ago now, it was a completely different situation. So I think any progress is good progress.
yeah, and maybe most importantly, in terms of your career path, you're working again. What's
Yeah.
happening now at the Met?
Well, we're like full force. I mean, since September, we've been 7 shows a week, uh, pretty nonstop, and we haven't missed a single show.
Wow.
They test us a couple times a week, and they do what they can to like minimize exposure and things like that. But it's been, all things considered, it's been pretty smooth.
Yeah,
Um,
good.
and I feel like if we've made it this far, we've got 1 week left until we take a mid-season break. I think we're gonna make it through this year totally fine.
That's really
That's
great.
something to be really thankful about, and we're probably performing more than anyone right now, I'd say. Just because the Met is what it is. It's just a huge organization. 7 shows a week is just a lot, and it was their intention to just completely go back and you know hit it hard again, and it's worked. So
Yeah. Audiences are coming back.
a
You
lot,
explained
yeah, yeah,
yeah. You explained to me when we were down in Boca, you had a week that was just outrageous. Explain to everyone like what a typical week looks like, or maybe that particular week that you had where I think you played it was either three or four different operas.
yeah. There's certain parts of the season it comes in waves where you'll be performing operas and then rehearsing other operas that are incoming. So it's this kind of snowball effect. And the worst weeks mentally are the ones where you're performing maybe three different operas, maybe 4 shows, but like three of them are different. And then on top of that, you're rehearsing two or three other ones. So in your brain, even if the operas that are going you're familiar with, you're still juggling 20 hours of music. So it takes a lot of CPU usage, if your brain was a computer. It's just a lot to be keeping on the back burner. Um, and then, it'll get intense like that. And then those other operas that were being performed, they phase out. And then maybe you only have to focus on two different operas for a week. And then you can kind of recharge like that. So yeah, it comes and goes. But yeah, that particular week, it was, you know, it's a bit overload, but that's just what
What
it is.
what operas are you playing right now?
Right now, I'm in the fortunate position. I'm just juggling two: Marriage of Figaro and Tosca by Puccini.
Awesome.
So, and then the other two that are being done are Rigoletto and Bohème, and Stephen White is playing those. So, we're just coasting right now. This is our last week until we have a 2 week break. So there's no rehearsals. It's just performances.
That's great. What are you doing during your 2 week break?
Going to Guadeloupe.
Really?
Yeah, my wife's
Cool.
French, so that's a French island in the Caribbean, as you know.
Amazing.
So that'd be cool. Yeah,
That is great.
escape the 30-degree weather.
You got to get out of there.
Uh huh.
Explain to people what makes opera so uniquely difficult and makes it so different from most symphonic literature.
I think the hardest thing is that, let's say you have a Beethoven symphony and a symphonic orchestra, you can kind of just jam out, and there's some placement things and there's some spots where you need to, be a little on top of the beat or whatever. But for the most part, you're just kind of jamming out. You got these passages where you're just playing along with. Opera has so few of those, and it's like this amoeba. And the time is so flexible, but you play like the least flexible instrument. because I can't make a sound that goes like wah. I can't sneak in most of the time. So it's these impact things that I have to place them perfectly with things that are kind of inherently imperfect. I think that's like the beauty of opera. It's kind of this stretchy thing, but you're in charge of kind of placing these notes, and people hear the impact and surround your sound. But if you aren't 100% sure about where it goes, it can be a disaster. So I think that's tough. And on top of that, I mean, it's just long songs. I mean, they're just really long,
Yeah.
and mentally it can be quite a lot. For example, the Bacchanal, the Samson and Delilah. We all know that the dun 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 dun. Well, in the symphonic version, that's just its own little suite. But that actually comes at the end of like the third act. If you've been going for 2.5 hours and you've played all these other things, there's been two intermissions, and then you start that third act, and 30 minutes into that, you're completely on the spot out of nowhere. And I think mentally, it's just a long time to focus.
Yeah.
And also, starting this job, the way this orchestra plays, it's very unique. I feel like everyone that starts this job, there's such a learning process where you're going to, it's not going to be perfect. And I think everyone knows that in the orchestra. Whenever we get someone new, they're going to make some funny mistakes. They're funny to us, but we all are like, oh, I remember when I did that. You jump in a hole, there's conductor kind of giving these weird cues, but they're not for you and they're not for anyone in the orchestra, but sometimes they are. And um, that's tricky, not jumping for those and then learning how the orchestra places the beat. It's always kind of later than you would really expect, but at the same time, you don't want to be late. So it's still really hard. But four
You're
years,
also
I'm starting to figure it out, I'd say.
you're also yeah, you're also positioned like way on the side, so you're at like a 90-degree angle from the maestro. Is that right?
That's right.
So that can sometimes make it hard to discern like beat patterns and things like that, especially if he's facing like to the
Yeah.
left. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of placement, I mean, the first thing I did was Zauberflöte, magic flute, and I remember I'm used to being in the back of the orchestra. So if you are playing Mozart, you don't want to be early, but you want to be definitely not late, right? And I remembered Levine always being like telling me that it's a bit early all the time, and I'm like, really? And I realize it's actually because where I'm positioned, the audience is right to my left. So actually, the correct placement is something that in a regular orchestra would actually probably be a little late. It would be two in the pocket, and that's actually like the correct placement for us. It's that kind of took a little getting used to because every time I subbed anywhere else, I was always conscious of like being a little on front or seeing all my old teachers play. Normally it's a big thing to be the first one in a way, just logistically where you're you know seated. So that's
It's
not
yeah, the placement thing is entirely different in that pit than it is on an orchestra stage where you're all the way in the back.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned is, that I'm fascinated about is, I just think about a symphony orchestra concert being, 2 hours and 15 minutes. And, I think of the times when sometimes at 7:55, I was thinking, I wish I had a little more sleep last night, or in the second half, I'm feeling a little fatigued. You've got to go through like different stages throughout a three-act opera in which sometimes you're starting to flag and you've got to kind of pump yourself up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes you're just holding on,
Yeah.
you know, but I mean, you feel completely differently. Like some in the first act, and then like sometime in the third act or whatever it is. It's almost like you're a different person.
Yeah.
Biologically, it's like
Yeah.
sometimes 3.5 hours will pass, and you're still there. And at that point, I mean, you could be in any state of mind.
Those
Yeah,
Wagner operas, I don't know how you do it.
me neither. Yeah. Other, but it's also some of the best music ever. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But it really feels like my first ring opera. It really felt like I had like climbed a mountain. at the end. I was like, I can't believe it's like ending now. Like I had
Wow.
almost accepted that it was never going to end, and I was actually okay with it.
That's amazing.
Different, you know? It's like a
That's
flash in the
incredible.
pan or something.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned about stepping in a hole and being that you play timpani is, listening to opera, you hear all these moments where the singer's in sort of a fermato recitative and it's followed by a big brass note that timpani plays too. And it's so easy for that to be a flam if the conductor just goes, wah. And with brass players, you can't really point to, oh, it was that person because, there are three trumpets and horns. You always know if the timpanist came in early or late or stepped in a hole, right?
Absolutely. You cannot hide at all. And
Yeah.
that's just the name of the game. It's like it's just a high pressure situation. Um, and there's a lot of good things about that. I guess you get a lot of the glory, but also you're on the spot constantly.
Yeah.
And it's weird, I mean, because also, like you said, with conductors, sometimes you're trying to find the sweet spot between what the singer's doing and how they're kind of deflecting and ending their phrases and what the conductor's doing. Sometimes the conductor is trying to compensate for what the singer's doing, but you can't really go with the conductor because then you'll be, you know what I mean? So this is middle ground where like if he's doing that and he sounds like that or they sound like that, then kind of just meet him in the middle and hope it's fine.
I think what you're describing is something, yeah, I think it's really what you're describing is a depth to your interpretation and the idea that there's no such thing as like a perfect concert or a perfect opera because the placement is going to be between singers and orchestra and where you are and where the conductor is. There's going to be moments that are squirrely. Anytime I've played an opera, it
Yeah.
doesn't hang perfectly together in every moment
Right.
of all three acts. Is you
Right. And
experience
if
that
it
on the Met
does,
too, right?
right. If it does, it's like, I can count those on one hand where it's like, wow, that was really, really good. But I've
Yeah.
played 300 concerts or so. And yeah, like maybe four of them have felt like that. It's pretty low. And
Yeah.
you also, what I've gotten good at and what we're all good at, and I think the opera world, because there's so many things that can go wrong, there's so many moving parts, there's so many people. If something doesn't go ideal, you have to just, it's on to the next one. You can't be thinking, uh, what was that? What happened? Whose fault was that? No, you just move on because there's so much. I mean, it's going to be forgotten anyways,
So you got to
unless
have a
it's
really short
really,
memory.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah. Amazing.
unique,
Hey,
yeah.
I think people would be interested to hear about your audition and the audition process. I know that you didn't expect to become an opera timpanist per se, but the Met Opera principal timpani position happened to be the job that you won.
Yeah.
Can you take us through that audition and what that was like?
Well, leading up to that, I was just kind of on the audition circuit, and my job was just auditioning. I mean, my first audition was when I was at Indiana when I was really young. I think I was 20, 21. I took San Diego. I just started taking them. Of course, I didn't advance for a while. I just wanted to kind of get a hang of the experience. Um, and as things, it was this weird process of like as I got closer and closer over the course of the next 10 years or so. Um, I just kind of I almost forgot about outcomes. I just my job was just to prepare for the next audition. So when the Met opened up, I mean, I had just been in the last three auditions or so in a row. I was like right there. It was like San Francisco, Minnesota, North Carolina. I was like runner up there, and then there was like a year off until the Met. There was like no auditions, but I was so in that zone that I was just okay on to the next one. I was completely emotionally removed from it. I forgot about outcomes. I was just like, this is just what I do. I just prepare audition lists and go take them. Um, but the actual Met audition, I mean, it was just was just another audition. I mean, I almost forgot that it was possible that I could win another audition, honestly, or win a audition. I forgot that that was actually possible. So
But
it's
this
really
one was different because the list was so different.
right. Well, they made the list. It's it's still maybe 30% um, regular excerpts
Uh-huh.
because they know that they know that. For example, in the United States, there's three. I mean, there's not that many opera jobs, right? It's not really a normal thing. I feel like everyone taking an opera list they're going to be unfamiliar with most of this stuff. So they know that people are auditioning elsewhere or might want to come from a symphony orchestra or whatever it is, and they make sure that about 30-40% of the list is actually standard stuff. Believe it or not, because they don't want to scare away people. And like I said, whenever anyone starts the Met, they're not very experienced at opera. It's pretty much impossible to be. Um, but the regular audition, the only thing that was different in this audition was in the finals we had to play with the pianist, which I had never done. I took one audition in Stockholm for the Royal Opera. We had to play with the pianist in the semifinals, I believe. It was the only time I'd had to do that. I've had orchestra rounds and things like that, but this was with the pianist. The finals, half the list was with the pianist. I thought that was kind of unique. And
What did you play with the pianist?
played, I believe there was a from Valkyr, the Wagner ring opera. There's a really long section that's just kind of like D flats at the bum, ba 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 bum, and you have to land these weird extended kind of downbeat things. Try to line them up with the piano. They had us do that. A random section of La Boheme, and then also trying to remember. Rosenkavalier might have been with the pianist.
Wow.
I think. I forget what else, to be honest. The thing is, it just kind of it kind of flashes by, and then you get out of there, and you're like, huh. And I know, like, ideally, like, I was as prepared as I could have been for every audition, but no matter how prepared you are, I think when you walk out of there, there is an element of, wow, what just happened?
Yeah.
You know? Even though I had done hundreds of mock auditions, there is to recreate the actual thing. I mean, you can try as much as you can, and that's part of the process. But the actual thing is you just do it, and
Yeah.
you know,
How many rounds did you play?
3,
Yeah.
yeah.
How long was each round? Roughly.
Let's see, first round I think was relatively short, maybe 6 or 7 excerpts, and then this next round was more around 12 or so, a little longer. And then the final round, I think it was like 5 excerpts with piano and then 5 by yourself. So oddly, the final round was probably only like 20 minutes.
How many other people were in the finals?
It was 4 of us total.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you weren't, at this point in taking auditions, you weren't really thinking about outcomes. But I imagine that after each round, you walk out and think, well, how did that go? What are my chances here? How did you feel after prelims, semis, and finals?
Um, you know, after prelims, I felt pretty good. I felt like it was kind of my middle of the road thing. And I did find throughout preparation and just the way I was thinking of things or where I was at, it seemed to be this point where even my average was getting through rounds. I think that was a really good sign where I started advancing even though I wasn't really excited about it. Um, Semi round I think was better, and then finals I think was. I remember after I played first in the finals, and I remember I went outside and I told myself like, well, if someone else gets it, like, good for them. Like they they deserve it because I don't think I can do better than that.
So by finals, you thought this was my best playing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
That's a great feeling. Is there anything in your preparation process for this particular audition that was different from your normal preparation that you felt gave you an advantage, or was it just that you'd done so many of them that you were just comfortable?
I mean, I think it was that I was just on that roll. And there's one thing I did differently, but that was only because I had to, is that they said if you get to the finals, you may have to play with a pianist. So I found a pianist. It was at Cleveland State at the time, and I believe there was. I don't know if I paid them or something. I believe I did. I was like, "Can I run these things by you, and just make sure I'm not doing anything weird?" And just went through some things with a pianist like once. The things that I thought that I might have to play with them.
So that was
Um,
helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I did that for sure. I think if I didn't do that, that would have been because I remember there was actually one thing where because part of the job in opera is you have to change notes. Sometimes, for example, Rossini when he was writing timpani parts, the drums sounded like ping and like pam, basically like bum bum. There was not really like the modern sound of just this clear pitch. So
Yeah.
he was writing notes just kind of as like timbres, not really intonation. So we had one thing that was like change the notes. It was William Tell Act One finale or something. So change the notes at your discretion to fit the melody. And I think it said in that one you have to play with a pianist. So I got a pianist and just to see if my note selection wasn't clashing weirdly with anything. And I think there was one or two notes that I circled. I was like those just felt weird, and I think I edited those. So if I wouldn't have done that, you know, it's just another little pitfall. You find all the pitfalls and you just
Yeah.
um
By the way, a question about changing notes. That this would be more about on the job. How
uh
often do you make changes? I mean, I've had that situation where the timpani part says E and B or C and G, and you tune it up and you start playing, and then the orchestra's in a whole different key, and then you realize, oh, as you mentioned, this was written sort of enharmonically. You got to figure out what the fourth should be, right?
right. um Luckily our library is very deep. Like we had Richard Horowitz who would change arguably too many notes, but I mean, he would not let any questionable notes slide. Sometimes, but I have his parts for reference, Duncan's parts, and it's rare that we get something that's like from that era that of when intonation was kind of disregarded. It's rare that we get something from that era that hasn't been done and hasn't been dealt with. But sometimes I'll get a Horowitz part and I'm like, this is a really good starting point in the sense that it's too many notes are changed. It's like a circle of fifths up this pedaling chromatic scales. But at least you have that option if you want to go that route, or you can dial it back. Um, so luckily, don't have to do it that much. But if I had to do it, I would just listen to a recording with the part, and every time a note seems questionable, circle it, and then go back and maybe look at like the root note of that scale or what's a similar range of note that could fit and not be terrible sounding. I had to do some of that recently. Actually, we did Cendrillon, Cinderella, and there are some very questionable notes in there. Um, but you do your homework, and then even in the first rehearsal, if there's something that you play and you're like, that just, I'm not sure about that one, just circle it and give it a look later, and then then you change it.
Yeah,
You know?
you mentioned doing your homework. I happen to know that you can't go into a first rehearsal with the Met playing principal timpani and not have done your homework. But take us through what that's like. You started telling us about it. How long do you take? How many times do you listen to the opera? What kind of stuff are you doing?
Normally at least twice, but most likely three times. But the
Mhm.
first time, I'm starting it like this low priority of like, can I just follow along without getting lost? So so you follow along, and every time something happens in the music where you're like, what is that? Circle it, get through the whole thing, and then go to every circled spot and look at the score, figure out whatever cue you need to write in, rhythmic cue, whatever it is, so that you can latch onto something. You get those, and then you listen to it again, and you figure out your tuning plan. You figure out what notes to listen to tune, all these things. So it gets more logistical. And then maybe a third um, proofread to figure out general sound, mallets, and stuff like that, and also just to if there's anything you missed. The ideal goal is just to be able to look at the music and listen to the recording and be like, it feels easy to listen to. I'm not lost. I know what's going on. And if I get off for a second, I have kind of an anchor that's like, oh yeah, there's that cue because I took care of that. And you just do those. It's so much like practicing. I mean, you find these little pitfalls and you find these little traps and you just kind of eliminate them one by one until your odds of success are so high that you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A question from Diego Zavaleta. Hello, Lee. So you do have two first names, so we could call you Lee Parker, but
It's confusing.
it is confusing. But Diego, this is Parker Lee. But he wants to know, how old were you when you won the job?
27,
27. You were a youngster. And how many auditions had you taken? Do you know the exact number?
13.
Wow.
And but I'm counting, I believe when I calculated that number, I'm only including jobs that if I were to win that job, I would be able to sustain myself
Yeah.
from that. So I'm not counting festivals or
Yeah.
other institutions or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the same. It's funny. 13 was my lucky number too. Chicago was my 13th.
Is that
But
right? Wow.
yeah, right on. So there's definitely a lot of people interested in your your practice process, your
Huh.
recording process. So I'd love for you to talk about that. I should mention that I'd love for you to talk a bit about your education. Um, you ended up at Cleveland State studying with Tom Freer, and I know
That's
that
right.
that was really critically important to your
Hmm.
success. And that's probably a big part of, well, you being a freer artist, why Tom generously is giving away 5 pairs of mallets to somebody in this room. My goodness. Hey, Harry, what are we giving away tonight? Can you run this down for me?
Yeah, we got a couple pairs. We are giving away a pair of Cloyd Duff twos, a pair of the BCS, which is like a soft. I mean, Parker can tell you what that is, and then the CCD6, which is another soft cartwheel stick. And then Tom sent us some awesome. Oh yeah, they're Hornwoods on carbon fiber, so it's like a kind of a big wooden pair,
Yeah.
and and then we have the medium hard Super Twos on carbon fiber. So
And these are some of your faves, right, Parker?
Yes, I use them all the time. If I recall correctly, for example, the BCS, I mean that's a great stick. I was using that a lot when I was auditioning too, but in the orchestra it's super useful. It just kind of is a stick that maintains this the quality of sound, like kind of no matter what the dynamic range is, which is a really just useful tool, I'd say. Um, and then the CD6, it's like a Duff six, which we all know the Duff sticks, classic stick, but it's on a carbon fiber shaft, so it's a bit longer and has a bit more dexterity. Use those all the time. Duff two, I mean, it's classic stick. Super two, great stick. I mean, they're all great sticks.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to Freer Percussion, thanks to Tom Freer. Parker, take us through, briefly your education and then some of the things that you you sort of graduated to in terms of how you practice and go after preparing a list like the one for the
Yeah.
Met?
Yeah, it was definitely a collective effort or a kind of a gradual growth for sure, personally. But I started off at Indiana University studying with John Tafoya. I grew up in DC suburbs, so he was timpanist of the National Symphony at that time. I would go see him play, and I was just really drawn towards the timpanist, and I was like, "What is that? I want to do that." You know, very simple, classic, you know, situation for all of us, really. I mean, just saw how it just sounded so cool and looked so fun. Went to do that and kind of found my own way. Indiana was a very like uh, I won't say loose, but kind of like find your own path. You
Right.
could study with so many different people and kind of just find your own way. And you know, I focus on timpani with John, and then towards my end, the end of my time there, I had kind of I wanted to refine my sound in a certain way, and I was really drawn towards the Cleveland sound. I was listening to these Cleveland Orchestra recordings, and so you know, and I also felt like I needed at that time more of a foundation, technical foundation, fundamental thing. So I went to Cleveland Institute of Music with Paul Yancic. He kind of got worked on a lot of my fundamentals and just kind of playing the instrument. Um, and at that time, I was taking some auditions, but I wasn't really breaking through. I would kind of surprise myself sometimes and maybe get to a finals that I don't know if I deserve to be in. I was getting by on something. I don't know what that was. And then I felt like I needed to get out of the Cleveland box, so I went to Lynn and studied with you, Ted Atkins, you know, and
I
then
remember
that
that vaguely, only vaguely.
vaguely, and
Yeah.
then at that point I realized, all right, that brings me to this other point, and I was getting to some finals kind of, but I felt like there was a big gap between where I was at and actually getting the gig. So I went to Cleveland State after that, studied with Tom, and that was, I think, where everything really came together. All my different experiences, all my different teachers, and then with Tom, I think I really learned what it really takes. And you know, it was tough, but when I went to him, I started to really crack the glass ceiling. You know, it was after. I
What?
mean, when I
Sorry,
went,
sorry to cut you off, Parker, but
yeah,
I'm just so curious because I've always wanted to study with Tom.
yeah.
What's the secret, or what's the main component, or what's give us something, little tidbit about something that you might have picked up there. Was it just like the
Well,
level
I,
of work that was required, or a depth about how you thought about
I
playing
think it's a
timpani? What
depth.
was it?
It's a depth. He kind of redefines how good it needs to be,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you know he talks about how you have to listen to yourself in such a way where you got to listen like 5 times to yourself on a playback with these different categories of how and get really into just focus on your time and then just focus on your rhythmic integrity, then just focus on your intonation, blah blah, blah, and listen to it like 5 times. Overall musicality, all these things, and you have so much information. And I feel like what's interesting about Tom and kind of not normal is that I think he something about his brain or something he can hear all 5 of those at once somehow. I don't no one else can do that. So it's like playing for this. I don't. His ears are just incredible, and he'll tell you what's wrong with it in detail and basically how to fix it. But he also is just very brutally honest. I mean, it was 2 years of lessons with him every week, and you get nervous for those lessons, you know, because you know if the type of teacher where if he says, "Okay, good, what else do you have?" That means it's really good.
Yeah.
It's a rare thing to get, but he will never. There's no sugarcoating, and I think I just really needed that, and you know, it kind of set the bar to a certain point where once I was getting close to that bar, it was translating directly out in the audition world. It was like once I think the lessons were going well, and I obviously also it was all a snowball effect. I mean, I was putting in massive amounts of time. You
Yeah.
know, like
And you mentioned that.
I was also at a point in my life where I was like, I'm so far into this, I don't have, there's no plan B. So this is it. And it was every day, 7, 8 hours. That was what I did. And it just started adding up. And once I was getting to this point where the lessons were going well, and I don't know, I just hit this stride, and then I started just making finals after finals. And that kind of lined up. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
You mentioned the recording of yourself in order to get your ear attuned to the things that Tom could already hear. So I happen to know that you would record yourself, and whatever it was, you would listen to it and live with it, even if it was like highly imperfect. What's the benefit of that?
Um, yeah, so what I wanted to do, there's this music producer guy who his whole creative process is he'll like spit out the idea and bounce the audio file, and then he'll listen to that audio file for like 2 weeks straight and he'll prevent himself from going in and changing too many things. So after like a week or two, he'll finally go in and he'll have so much inspiration, and he'll know exactly what he wants to change. And he'll be thinking, oh, this is too loud, this is too soft, oh, maybe I want to restructure this, all these things. And I remember Tafoya talking about the same thing. It was like a eureka moment where Tafoya talked about this back at IU, and he said, when you record yourself, like experiment with living with it a little bit, like sleep on it, like let it bug you. And I kind of got really into that. And what I found is that it's important to generate like an emotional response. Like it's okay to listen. If you listen to yourself tune the Beethoven 9 coda at an incorrect interval once, you might think, oh yeah, redo it and don't do it out of tune. But does that really get to the root of the problem? Like the significance, because at the end, you get one shot to do these things. So you need to really live with like, why did I do that? What's my process? Where am I getting my note? How am I thinking? And you let it make you mad, and you like listen to it in the car on the way to school. Again, you're like, there it is again. Like, that's unbelievable. I cannot believe this. On the
Yeah.
way home, there it is again. I mean, can you believe this? And you do this so many times, you'll never do it again. If
You're
you let it,
trying to piss yourself off.
yeah, you have to develop, because if it doesn't get under your skin, if it doesn't like evoke an emotional reaction, it'll never mean enough to you to like really fix it. If you play Lieutenant Kiji and you rush something, it's easy to say, play it again and don't rush. Okay, problem solved. But if you go into this like, existential journey for a week, thinking about how you subdivide, how you get your tempo feeling, what is your, inner subdivision, all these things. I mean, after a week, you really have you'll really realize that you have a problem with rushing or whatever it is, and it'll kind of just fix itself. The thing is, I would keep practicing that first week, but I would keep listening to those first recordings, because here's the good thing is that they'll never get worse than that. You almost want your first recording of the prep process to be as bad as possible. You almost want everything that could go wrong to go wrong, because that's what it's all about. Like, no one's going to do that for you. You have to find everything that could go wrong for you and make sure you're aware that that could happen and make sure it doesn't happen.
So,
So,
do you start recording yourself playing the list as soon as you have the list learned?
yeah.
Okay. So, how far out is that from the audition?
Normally about 7, 8 weeks or so. And
So,
I'll
you've
just,
learned, yeah, sorry, you've learned all the notes, and now you're going to start recording yourself. Do you record the whole list every day, or tell us how you go about it?
I would just have my Zoom recorder and be like, just go straight down the list. Maybe randomize it through an app or something, but it doesn't really matter at this point. You're just trying to figure out, where is my ground zero? Like, where am I starting from, right? When we take these auditions, you get to this point here Then the next audition, you're relatively at that point again, maybe a peg down if you're rusty or what, or there's new rep. But it is kind of this like thing like that. Um, and I would just press record, play the thing, no matter how it goes, press stop. That's its own file, and then do that for the whole list. Even if it was an assistant, I took one assistant timpani audition. So Milwaukee, let's say I played Porgy and Bess, and I just completely burn in the middle and like stop playing. Your brain, what you would say is like, "Oh, I'll do it again." I think you should actually listen to yourself have that memory slip a bunch. You know? Yeah, I mean, honestly, I really think because like it's worth something. It's not a fluke. This is the thing. It's not just a fluke. It happened, and there's a reason it happened, and it's okay.
Yeah.
So I would do that, and what I would do is I'd have all the files, and I would upload them or have them. This is before iPhones had so much memory or data was easily shared. But I would upload them to like a link where I could access them at any time. So I'd be able to like drive in the car, listen to these takes, walk to school, go home, and instead of watching TV, just listen to these day one takes and really just become really familiar with like where am I at right now? I still have the Met day one recordings, you know? And it takes a lot of stress out where I was at a point where actually a lot of the things I'm like, okay, that needs work. But it's not that bad. Like it's pretty solid. But then there's something where I'm like, ooh, like I wanna I don't really know how that one goes. And then you categorize them into A, B, C lists. So at this point, the A list would be the things that are okay, that's listenable. And the B things would be like, it's got some issues, but it's not the worst. And the C things would be things that you've got a memory slip in, the musical idea is way off, you're playing wrong notes, things like that, that in any audition they would cut you.
Things that need lots of work, and then do you start? Is that where you start your practice the next day on the C list?
Yeah, I actually have a scan of like some. I was digging through old practice journals, and I can kind of show you what some of this looks like.
That would be great. Harry, do we have screen sharing capability for Mr. Parker Lee?
Yep, I just made him co-host.
Great.
Cool. I'm gonna try to. So it's funny. I'm digging up these things, and I'm like trying. I wrote them, and I'm trying to decode what I was talking about.
But
Honestly.
you were big into like journaling and taking notes on your playing and notes on your recording,
I'm,
right?
I'm sitting here. There's like these are three books. They're all filled, completely filled with notes, because that was what I just did that for a really long time. Like that's how I would remember what was going on.
Yeah.
It's funny though. I mean, I guess it's like a short-term memory storage thing that eventually turns into long-term. But I'm reading a lot of this, and I'm not really sure what I was talking about in a lot of these. But at the time, it definitely made sense. So
Yeah.
that's good. But that's also a testament to like it doesn't really matter what you're doing, and there is no silver bullet. What's evident looking at these things is it was my life completely and thoroughly, and I
Yeah.
was doing it all the time. So like, let me
I
try to
Yeah. I
trying to
felt the same way, Parker, about journaling and writing down what was going on in the practice room. It wasn't always necessarily that I was going to go back and study it intently. It was sort of reinforcing that I really cared, and this was my entire, existence in that moment. And I think that was really helpful psychologically. Okay, so here's the A list, B
absolutely.
list, C list.
This is one example. These are random pages, and it happened more than one time. This would be an example. I believe that I recorded everything cold. It looks like this was maybe Milwaukee, assistant timpani. And it looks like the A list, what I would do. At the bottom there, it looks like maybe I tallied that that's 15 minutes. And at the bottom, I was like, I am going to practice those just for 5 minutes each. Because the way I would do it is you want to prioritize your time on the stuff that's the worst.
Yeah.
So you got that. And then the B list, it looks like maybe I was you can see that's 2 hours 55 minutes a day, and then the C list was an hour and 30. It looks like I allocated 20 minutes to the Bach. You see what I mean? It doesn't really, but the main point is that ABC. So the A stuff was already like, okay, it doesn't have any obvious problems. I don't need to freak out about that, and so on. And then there was stuff, yeah, the waterfall. Like I don't even think I could at the time. I had been so set on timpani where that really needed work. So this was an example of just a starting point. And what I do is slowly, you want to get all the C's into the B's and the B's into the A's, and then redefine your ABC category. So you keep condensing and expanding them. That's kind of what happens. And so maybe at stage one, my example of an A is like no obvious problems. Maybe 2 weeks before the audition, when I'm doing mock auditions, a C would be something that's good, but there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not convincing. Like my standard gets so much higher.
Yeah.
And every time, so doing that a bunch.
And sometimes stuff from the A list would get over to the C list because now that you're looking at it more,
Yeah.
poring over it, more intently. So you have to kind of put that in the hard work category in the C category.
Yeah. It's like whack-a-mole a little bit.
Right.
Um,
You know what? You also prove that the better the musician, the worse the penmanship. Your penmanship looks like a lot like my 6-year-old boy's. So it's
I was gonna
really
say,
impressive.
don't be jealous of my handwriting.
No,
I
it
know it's
shows your
really good.
dedication to timpani and to percussion. It's awesome.
I know it's really good. You don't have to tell me.
No, I hear you.
It's like
This is
very
so
clear.
but the most important thing that I think everyone should take away is that you were clearly interested in taking notes so that you had a practice plan for each day, and probably every hour was like,
Oh yeah.
you had it scripted.
Well, yeah. I mean, and every audition I would take, I would come home and I would go back to the drawing board because I'd be like, I wish I would have blah blah blah. I mean, I remember um, I took Nashville and I was able to like watch the orchestra round. I was cut in the first round. This was 2018, no, way before that. It was I don't know when it was. It was when I was at Lynn, actually, Nashville. And
And
I
you snuck
remember
into the finals?
I did. I was able to watch the.
How'd you do that?
I said that I forgot my tuning fork, and they let me in because I really wanted to see, like, man, there's 2 people left. I want to see. I took this audition, and that was a big revelation for me because
Yeah.
they played Rite of Spring, Brahms 1, Beethoven 1, Beethoven 7, Young Person's Guide, just with the orchestra, with Giancarlo Guerrero. It was like, and I realized at that moment, I came here and I wasn't ready to do that. So why did I come here? So I started incorporating more like playing with recordings every day. Um, that's something Tom got me into big too, is that like you need to have the volume of the orchestra 11 out of 10 in your mind. Like you have to it has to be stuck in your head every
Yeah.
excerpt.
Yeah.
But I would just go back to the drawing board. But these are throughout the years. Here's another ABC list, and it looks like I prioritize my time this way, where like don't touch the A's, and the B's just do 5 times with the metronome at 75, and the C's do like actual work on them. Because I kind of realized maybe that was a better approach. I really don't think it matters. I think as long as you're practicing all the time and you've got a structure, I mean, I'm proof that this is like, it's not really consistent.
Yeah.
It's always changing. Here's
Yeah.
my technique page. These are little spots. This is for the Met audition. Little things that in my day one recordings, I was like, that's not coming across, but I know it's not because I messed it up. It's because there's something technical that's lacking. So these little rhythmic figures here, even if it's like an E to an A roll or whatever it is, I would like look at this technique page for 10 minutes a day and just kind of shed these little things. Just kind of let them marinate a little bit.
Yeah. And so Tom was giving you insight to all these excerpts, but I think this is also proof that a teacher can only get you so far, and that the player has to get in and do that detail work and then hear it on his or her own. You can't, because your teacher, you're only seeing them 1 hour a week,
Yeah.
maybe an hour and a half if you're lucky. You have to do it yourself.
Absolutely. I think any teacher would agree. Tom used to say same thing to Foya, same thing, Yoncher, same thing. It's like I can give you my teaching, I can give you my advice and my help, but you're the only one who can make it happen. I can't practice for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, absolutely, yeah.
And then
Um,
with all this preparation, your A, B, and C list, did you ever go to an audition where you're still kind of going, yeah, these three excerpts are still kind of in the C list, they're not really where I want them to be, or did you get everything to an A point?
no, like as it goes on, there's like a cutoff because the last thing you want to do is the auditions tomorrow, and you're like, oh, those that C list though. You have to transition from that stage to this kind of Zen stage where you're like just focusing on the overall thing. Like I have some pages here, towards the end here, right here. These are just mocks. Every sixth thing is just mocks, little rounds I would do. And you can see the notes are not much. They're at the bottom. They're just Rosencavalier overall. Oh, relax the rolls. And when you have this little rhythm, really, punch it out. Just little overall things. And as you get closer to the audition, you're thinking more and more less specific and more just colors and kind of things like that. Because I want to get away from that whole thing, or like, well, they asked Mahler 5 and that is in my C list. Like you have to get away from that because you'll go crazy.
Right.
And I would get more and more. Here are some notes more from when it's getting more analytical, where you're listening to it 5 times with these different categories, and you're kind of getting really in there. Um, this is good for the first couple weeks of audition prep when you're really refining. But you do not want to be doing this like the week before the audition. You want to just be playing mocks, living with them, accepting this is where you are. It's the best you can do at this point, and you just go do it. Um, you can't be thinking, this is from Minnesota. This was randomly in my book. This is an example of what you might have to do in a final round. This is like 23 excerpts in a solo.
Wow.
You can't be thinking on this analytical level where you're like, all right, this one's in my C list. At this point, you're just,
Yeah, you gotta
yeah.
you gotta just keep it simple in your brain and say I got this.
Is there anything else? Should I stop sharing or?
No, this is great. We've got a bunch of questions, and then we better give away these mallets because everyone's like really jonesing hard
Let's
right
do
now.
it.
I can sense it through the Zoom chat room. Speaking of chat room, I'm going to try and find
Oh yeah.
questions. Yeah, so we talked about changing notes in operas, and you explained that. Talked about your preparation. We asked you a little bit about your recording process, and you kind of illuminated that for us. This is from Callie. How do you prepare excerpts with a lot of tuning when you will not be playing on your own drums, like say Concerto for Orchestra? I think this one is really challenging to step into an audition and play them on a fresh set of drums, right?
Yeah.
What do you
Um,
do?
the first thing I do in an audition, because you never know, maybe the fine tuners aren't right with the gauge or whatever. There are a lot of things that are out of your control. Um, if the drums have an obvious problem, everyone's going to be subject to that, so don't overthink it too much. But one thing I definitely do is I point the indicators to like G, A, D, F. Tom gave me this. This is good. This is really helpful. G, A, D, F, and the arrows pointing to those notes, and then practice this as if it's an excerpt. Like this is a tuning exercise that you should do every day because you do it when you get on the drums. Get your A, and then with the fine tuners, dial in G, A, D, F. So you know that those, no matter what else is going on, those are right.
Okay.
And those cover actually in Bartok that your G's good, You know your A is good, which I think use in that tuning plan. You know your D is good, and then everything else should be sitting around pretty closely. But what I will do is real quick before you're about to go, just tap through the excerpt as quickly as you can. Just make sure that nothing is wildly off. But this is also why it's good to do a lot of these two drum excerpts, or sorry, these tuning excerpts. Do them on two drums because there is an element of feel, and also being able to hyper adjust when something's not quite there. If you practice these things enough on foreign drums, which was definitely part of the process. I would play on the Yamahas or the Adams balance section or the Adams classics or the Walter Lights. I'd have someone mess up the gauges for me. I'd have someone, you get used to that and you expect it to be a disaster, and then 95% of the time it's actually fine. A well-run audition will have drums that are in good shape and gauges that are pretty close. So you're in charge of just the feel, knowing how it feels when it's locked in. If that makes sense, there's an element of feel, I guess.
Yeah, I know that for me, playing timpani in the orchestra, lots of times I didn't like the pitch as I hit it, and I got better and better at making a very quick adjustment so it gets in tune. Do you do that in auditions too?
Do the what was the last part you cut out?
Oh, sorry, like
Last.
you're playing Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, and the first C, this would not be great, but the first C, you're not is feeling a little flat. Do you kind of tweak it up really quickly to make it a perfect fourth?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got
And
to get good at that as a
well,
professional timpanist, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it happens. I mean, it's what's the old saying? It's like it's not a sin to play out of tune, but it's a sin to stay out of tune.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's the thing, if it's showing the committee or the other musicians, oh, I hear that, like I fixed it.
Yeah.
The worst is
So,
that you don't hear it. That would be bad.
yeah, so developing your ear, developing your feel on the drums, and developing your ability to make quick adjustments when you hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Bartok, be able, if you do it on the bottom two or the middle two or whatever, try to do it blindfolded or have someone tape up the gauges. See if you can do that. Try to like get used to the worst case scenario and see if you can actually get comfortable doing that. Then when the gauges are right and the drums sound great, it'll feel so easy. It's like adversity training. That's good.
So that sounds like that was a big part of your preparation was training for worst case scenario.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'll only ask this question because it's Joe Desital and because he had the hardest final round as a trial with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Parker, what was your CSU Jimmy John's order, and how was that most reflected in your preparation?
It was largely reflected, I'd say.
Oh,
I would say, I, so I worked at Jimmy John's for a really long time while I was at CSU and CIM. But I will say number 16, which is the Club Lulu,
mm,
I would get that. And they always ask you if you want cheese, but you don't really need cheese because you don't really taste it.
oh,
Say that. And the salt and vinegar chips, it kind of works really well with that.
fascinating. I didn't know this information. I did love me some Jimmy John's when I lived in Chicago. It's hard to find that out in LA. And
Well,
that it was yeah.
sorry, I noticed that there's another. The next question is kind of, relative to that. Jimmy John's.
That's how you found the balance in your normal life and auditioning. When you weren't prepping on timpani, you were working at Jimmy John's.
I worked at Jimmy John's like 5 days a week, and it was just an 11 to 2 or 11 to 3 shift, and I would just do that and then go spend the rest of my day at Cleveland State. And because when I was living in Cleveland, I mean, this is something that's unique about Cleveland. My rent was like $250, $300, so I was able to, really just survive off of not much. So.
I see all the New Yorkers just losing their minds over those rent prices. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
I tell them move to Cleveland.
Yeah, man. Unbelievable. Other troll questions. This is to Taps, I guess. When is the Stephen White class? Yeah, so we'll get that going. What's your post-show order at Blue and Gold in the Village?
I just don't know what this person is talking about. I
Oh,
can.
okay. Okay.
I know who that
Well,
is.
we'll have to
Uh,
get that answered offline.
so yeah, it's yeah.
All right. You want to leave that one alone. Next question. A serious one. What do you hear in young college age players that gets them cut the most?
I think there's a certain in timpani there's a certain sound or like presence that I think just takes a lot of time and maturity to sound convincing on the instrument, and I don't really know what it is. I think it just takes a massive amount of hours before you break through to this point where you sound like a timpanist. You just sound like you are part of the instrument. You're connected with it. I think a lot of younger players I hear, they're hitting the timpani, but they're not really going like buying in completely, if that makes sense. And I think it just comes with a lot of practice, but a lot of playing with recordings and just the ear kind of developing in a way where you kind of grow this confidence. So I guess it's a confidence thing,
Yeah.
but it's not purely that. It's I
Well,
guess
I'll give you one, Parker, that I know about your playing. When you play soft, you get the whole drum resonating. And I've noticed, and I remember this as a student, I didn't really understand that when you're playing piano or pianissimo, you still have to figure out how to get into the head so that you get like a full timpani sound. And I think I noticed that in your playing when you're playing softly.
yeah, and I think in the group especially that translates, but there's a certain way to play any instrument really, but especially timpani, percussion, where even if you're playing softly or if you're playing something very basic, there's the notes, if it's Mozart, like there's a way you can play where other musicians subconsciously hear it and subconsciously also say, I'm going with that. And
Yeah.
that quality I think just takes years to
Yeah.
develop. But I think there's something to think about when you're practicing. It's like if I was listening to this, would I feel compelled to jump on that ship with them, or would I run away?
And I imagine you continue to learn stuff about playing in the orchestra every week that you're playing with the Met.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
That's been one of the most interesting things with all the interviews we do is hearing how professionals, and a lot of whom are older than you, Parker, are still learning on the job. And
Yeah.
hopefully that's something that's inspiring to everyone in the room. I think that's the coolest. Martin wants to know what's your opinion on melodic tuning versus equal tempered tuning when you're in an orchestra audition?
There's no difference. I wouldn't overcomplicate things,
Mhm.
but I will say the difference mainly is an orchestra's intonation moves, and when you're by yourself, you're not playing with anyone. So you have to be in tune with yourself. And there are certain tendencies you have to be aware of. One in particular, certain keys. For example, if you're in D minor, the A belongs to the D. It has to sound like it's part of the D. And sometimes that can involve, or more specifically, I always notice this for some reason, E flats and B flats. It's like if you're sitting there and you tune it with an electronic tuner and they're both green, the B flat's going to sound low because in that key, the B needs just for whatever reason, it just needs it's part of the E flat and the way things resonate. It just needs to be a little bit, higher. Um, Things like that, I guess, like when you're by yourself, you have to be aware of those things. I don't know if that is equal temperament, but to
Mm.
me, don't think about it too much. If it sounds right, it sounds right. And if it sounds wrong, figure out what you're doing to get to the point where it sounds wrong. Like you got to know your tendencies. Maybe I used to have a problem where I would consistently tune my major thirds, which are pretty rare, but major thirds, I would tune them too narrow. They wouldn't be locked in enough. And I just had to just know your tendencies and just kind of eliminate them. But above all, just be in tune with yourself.
So obviously you did plenty of ear training away from the drums, I imagine.
Yeah, just sing with a piano intentionally. Like try to also intentionally be out of tune and understand. Like be like it's like if you're a dart player, if you're playing darts and you can hit bullseye every time, you want to have such accuracy where you can actually hit a random spot on the wall that's not the dartboard. Like you want to be that in tune with like your sense. You want to be that sensitive. So try to mess around with like intentionally tuning a 10 cent sharp fourth.
Hmm.
If you can be in that much control, then you just
Yeah.
choose to play in tune.
Yeah. And that also reminds me of what you said earlier about recording yourself and hearing yourself being out of tune. Living with that makes you angry enough that you're going to do what you need to do to get it in tune.
Yep. You just figure it out. Yeah.
Right. One last question. Can you remind us of those five different categories that Tom mentioned that you should be looking out for when you're listening and listening five times through?
It's changed throughout the years for me. I believe the original idea I got from this was from Tom,
Hmm.
and I believe maybe he can correct me if I'm
Well,
wrong.
hold on. I'm going to guess that one of them has got to be, well, rhythm, and another one's got to be intonation, and another one's got to be like tone. I mean, how am I doing?
So, what I did for a while was just overall time. You can do this to see how it syncs with the metronome, or just to see what your overall stretching and pulling is, right? And then you can listen again for rhythmic integrity. Maybe you're in time, but your da 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 is not. It's maybe you're crushing it. Things like that. So two different types of time. That's two listens.
Mm.
Third listen, you can listen to intonation. The fourth listen, what I started doing was I would reset my brain and get like I'd have a blank copy of the excerpt. I never wrote on my excerpts. And even when I would go to the audition, I would use their music. I don't know why, but for me, it was just, I wanted less noise. So I would look at
Yep.
that page and ask myself, is everything coming across crystal clear? I want to pretend I'm the flute player on the audition who didn't prepare to listen, you know, and didn't, do their homework and is just trying to cut you. Is everything clear? Are the dynamics tiered correctly? Is everything, the clarity of it, whatever, all those things. I would listen a fourth time like that. And then a fifth time, just overall general things like, can I hear the orchestra? Or, but it's changed multiple times. I mean, I think the real key is if you listen five times and just with a different intention every time, it gives you so much information. It's more information than anyone can get by listening to you one time live because they
And
can
I,
only
I
hear so much.
yeah, and I imagine that, as you're trying to single out in these different categories, you probably hear something go, oh, actually, my rhythm from step one wasn't what I thought it was in this particular spot. So you're noticing more things in the other categories too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it took me a while to figure out that recording myself was absolutely essential. And I imagine you used some video as well to see what it looked like. You do some of that?
Not as much as I should have, probably.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But that can, I mean, why not? I mean, that's
Yeah.
why not? It's maybe if there's something going on in your sound, if it's uneven, if you can see it, I mean, that's another tool. That's
Yeah.
another,
Yeah,
yeah.
great.
I mean, video, yeah. I know Tom always told me to do that, and I gotta admit, I didn't really do that.
You didn't listen to Tom.
I,
Tom, if you're here, man, I hope you're going to give Parker a hard time about this. He deserves it.
I bailed on the video stuff.
Hey,
Oh,
can you see this?
oh wow.
Yeah, what do you think of that? Yeah, that's our wheel. And this reminds me of like when I watched The Price is Right and, like watching the people spin the big wheel. I always wanted to, like, I would think I'd want to set it up at the 100 before I spin and then, like, get it twice around. So it's pretty much, if anyone's thinking that way, It's all about when I decide to spin this thing. But I can tell you, it's going to spin a lot, So
Oh,
I
this
think
is
it's pretty
very
pretty
cool.
random. But I'm going to wish everyone good luck, and anyone that gets really pissed off and leaves right after they find out it wasn't them, thank you for coming, and thank you for being here at our Taps Tuesday Q&A with Parker Lee, Principal Timpanist of the Metropolitan Opera. I'm going to click to spin. Here we go. Oh no, that wasn't it. Here we go. There it is.
Wow.
Mario Perez.
Wow.
Congratulations. Mario, if you would please put your email and your information. There you are. Put your email in the chat here, and we'll get in touch with you. Um, Mr. Tom Freer will be sending these mallets out personally. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you to Freer Percussion for this generous giveaway. This is exciting, and these mallets are now what you have to use to win a job, Mario.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pressure
Sure.
on you. You need to get out there and do it. Do everything Parker said. Win the job.
Just use those sticks. You'll be fine.
That's a yeah. It's a very good start. Thank you to Tom Freer. Thank you, Parker. This was really informative. It's great to see you and talk to you, and I can't wait to hang out with you again in person, man. Maybe down in Boca.
Yep. Let's make it happen.
Right on. Remember to stay tuned because Taps Tuesday will feature interviews with other artists of note. Coming up is Leo Soto, principal timpanist of the Houston Symphony, and the woman that replaced me as principal in Chicago, Cynthia Ye, will be with us in February. We'll be giving away a pair of Zildjian crash cymbals, which is also a pretty big giveaway. So I'm excited about that. Join us for that. Thanks to everyone for being a part of this. Please check out our website. If you know anybody who's interested in signing up for the Taps Music Festival, please let them know. And if you're interested, sign up now. You can submit your recording by April 30th. Thanks a lot to everybody. See you guys soon. Thanks again, Parker.
Thank you.
Thanks, Parker. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everyone.